Appreciate it. Thank you so much. So I'm a teacher and I move around a lot, so sorry about that. I just want us to just give another warm applause and appreciation for Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee, we thank you for providing us with some rich examples and in terms of how to have an inclusive curriculum. Your stories were passionate and certainly inspiring in terms of how we can have this sort of create a non-toxic environment for our scholars, how we can have high risk and high gain at our colleges and universities. And so I want us to just think about this as it relates to our particular colleges and universities. This relationship between an inclusive curriculum can't happen unless you have an inclusive campus. So what does an inclusive campus really look like? Now, many of us can recite the mission statement, the vision statement, our diversity and inclusion equity statements of our respective universities. Any volunteers want to recite it right now? No? No one, seriously? I know you know this. But think about this. Those statements are beautiful and they're powerful and they inspire us each day to go to work, to do the mission work that we're called to do. But those statements are meaningless if we don't constantly challenge, question our institutional, cultural, policies, practices, procedures. That still allow us to reproduce systemic inequities in higher ed. They're beautiful on paper, great to be part of a strategic plan, but how do we live it out? And that's important because our scholars really know what it feels like to be a part of an inclusive campus. Or to be part of a toxic environment. One model that I would propose that we consider in terms of how to integrate an inclusive curriculum, be an inclusive campus, is to transform our institutions into mentoring institutions. That's the proposed model. But what does that mean, a mentoring institution? How do we create a mentoring institution that doesn't reproduce the status quo? There's so much intellectual capital and creative energy here. Before I give you examples of what we're trying to do at St. Thomas, I want us to engage in this discussion. So this is the question I want you to talk with one or two of your friends at your table to address this first big question, and it simply is, what would a mentoring institution look like? What would be the major components of a mentoring institution? I'll say it again. What would a mentoring institution look like? What would be the major components of a mentoring institution? Let's take about 5 minutes, talk with your friend. I'll come back and we'll report out, get some examples. Okay, friends. I told you there's a lot of intellectual capital and creative energy. So the question was, what does a mentoring institution looks like? What are the major components? And the reason that we're pursuing this question is because we want to know how to create that inclusive campus. So I want volunteers, and because this is my family table 11, lucky. If you could share maybe either components of a mentoring institution or just your insights from your discussion. What does a mentoring institution look like?
Well, 2 thoughts. One was, I think the way you phrased it challenged us not to think about mentoring programs, but what it would be like for a whole institution holistically to mentor. And some of the components we talked about were that individual students would feel would be mentored, but they would also think as a whole the community was being mentored. And for me also, peer-to-peer mentoring would be really an important component of that.
Excellent. Remember, it's not about a mentoring program. Most of our institutions have pretty good mentoring programs. But we're looking at structural changes to address systemic inequities. That goes beyond programs. Excellent, perfect.
Yes, I'm Carlene with St. Ben St. John's in teaching faculty this year too. One thing we're doing, and you may hear about this later, is we're instituting a pilot this year called College 105, Success at College, 55 minutes, 1 day a week for 13 weeks, teaching the skills, some of the skills for college for first years. And the weekly assignment is a 1 to 2 page reflection paper on what did you do, what did you learn, how are you going forward? So I think as it relates to Buffy's question is, I think one thing a mentoring institution looks like is a paradigm shift into more reflection and conscientiousness about learning and outcomes. And we talked at our table about getting out of this duality of success and failure into more, what did we learn and then how do we move forward? Akin to the conversation last night about how are we teaching students what we're doing and why.
Beautiful, excellent. Intentionality. Reflection. And real concrete plans of how to change policies and practices that have the most impact on your scholars. Beautiful example.
Excuse me, Brian Peterson, Central College in Iowa. One of the, it struck me as we're thinking about this notion of a holistic change, Charlie Blage and Kathy Wise have often commented that when students refer to faculty, they're not referring to faculty. They're referring to anyone at the institution who's in a position to have some level of influence. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do at Central is to deliberately provide different touch points for all students, but all centered around asking them the same questions, right? So the RAs, our orientation leaders, the athletic coaches, the choir directors, the student employment supervisors, they're all kind of, we're trying to have similar conversations so that students know that they have lots of people to whom they can go. And if a student asks a question somebody doesn't have an answer to, oh, why don't you go talk with? And so it becomes kind of in some ways, an umbrella conversation.
Thank you. At a mentoring institution, if it's truly an inclusive campus, everyone's a mentor. Everyone reaps the benefit of mentoring. It's not just based on your assignment to a particular scholar or junior faculty or staff. It becomes the fabric of who you are, that no one will be left behind. It's an attitude of ohana. And when scholars are suffering, you're absolutely right. When they need to be rescued, they don't care if it's the person who's in your physical plant or facilities that can help them. Or if it's the great President Hinton that will come and help them. They just need help. And the mentoring institution says, if you're the first responder at that time, then that's your responsibility to respond. As we rescue our young boys in the cave, the team can't complain, no, that's my role. This is your job. I'm not assigned to that young man. Beautiful. That's the first question. That's just warm up. So now here's the second question. How could a mentoring institution, now that we have a good understanding what a mentoring institution looks like, how could a mentoring institution promote and foster the creation and sustainability of an inclusive curriculum? Let me say that again. How could a mentoring institution promote and foster the creation and the sustainability? Sustainability is important. The creation and sustainability of an inclusive curriculum. Once again, talk with your friends at your table. Okay, my friends. My friends at table 15, the mighty three. Woohoo! Powerful, powerful women. So the question once again was, how could a mentoring institution promote and foster the creation and the sustainability of an inclusive curriculum?
All right. Well, what we talked about, I'll just first say, none of us are on the faculty, so we talked about this anyway. We thought that we should include this in tenure requirements in how we think about faculty. What do we want faculty to be doing? We also thought faculty development was an important component of this. And then I think to have it in the curriculum, and I think this goes to for every faculty member to look at what are they doing in their classroom? What kind of materials are they using? How are we being inclusive? I was struck by the first speaker thing when she talked about, can every student see themselves in the community? And so how do we ensure that as a student's going into the classroom, they can see themselves in some component of that?
Beautiful. Excellent. If we're part of a mentoring institution, we would no longer have to say, I'm not part of faculty, to have a discussion about curriculum issues. If we're part of a mentoring institution. Because it would be a conversation that if it impacts our scholars, that all stakeholders internally should have an opportunity to vocalize their perspective on how to create an inclusive curriculum, because we're part of an inclusive campus. And once again, when a scholar needs help, they're not just going to go to a faculty member. They just might feel more comfortable talking to one of you powerful women. So you'll have these checks when you're having conversations in your committees and in your forums and your convocations. You'll know if you're a mentoring institution by how your colleagues are talking about one another. And it starts with us. Faculty and staff, disregard your title. What are you here for? That's when you have to remember your mission, your vision, your diversity and equity and inclusion statements. We're here for each other. And if there's a faculty member or there's a staff member that doesn't feel a sense of strong belonging and attachment at your respective college and university, you're not a mentoring institution. And if you're not mentoring one another, you cannot effectively mentor your scholars. Because you haven't seen it modeled for you. So how do you do it for them? That's why we don't always have to ask students, are you feeling included? Ask your colleagues. They'll tell you. But yes, rewards in terms of the evaluation is important. With the curriculum, there has to be a reward system. And we all know that if you want to reproduce particular behaviors, attitudes, you reward it. That's how it becomes the fabric of who you are. Other responses. Now I'm going to go to my friends at table 3 because Ty has the, I can't even say privilege of knowing me. It's a bad thing right now, but
Hi, I'm Ty Coleman at St. Catherine's University. I am going to hand the microphone to my colleague who did such a great job answering the question.
Thank you, Ty. I'm Takara Stark at St. Kate's. I shared that I think part of it is we all need to share the same experience. You know, at St. Kate's, we have 2 bookend classes that support our social justice commitment, the Reflective Woman and the Search for Global Justice, or Global Search for Justice. And our faculty and staff don't all take that class, or either of those classes. And how do we really say that that's part of our mission and what we do if we aren't actually reflecting that in what we're all doing? And I think that that goes to how do we all mentor and how do we all have those same conversations and be lifelong learners. And so I think it's starting with, you know, who we are and what we really say we are.
Beautiful concrete examples. If it's important for every first year class to take certain classes or read a common text, and the entire faculty and staff team are not part of that discussion, engaged in those readings, we're not a mentoring institution yet. Yes, sir.
Hi, Paul Crump, former trustee over at St. John's. I agree with all the points that were made. I certainly agree with the shared experience, but in my experiences, it's also imperative that leaders are out front modeling the behavior and really breaking new ground. Tribes, cultures, peoples, I mean, you know, we only have to look and read the paper and see behavior that some people are exhibiting that is appalling, and it's upsetting because we know that, you know, part of the reward system in society is you look upwards, and if people are not behaving correctly and inclusively and respectfully, it's painful because you know others will begin to emulate that immediately. So I think it's just an imperative that when we talk about this behavior, that it's very, very visible for the leadership here at the various institutions to be at the front, to be out front, be visible on it, to be measuring it, because again, rewards have to be following what's being measured to get done, or people will feel that it's rigged and it's phony, and it has to be objective. So honesty comes into play there as well. But I really think leaders just have to be out front in this effort, and I applaud Mary Hinton and Michael for taking on the challenge here today.
I agree. Yes, thank you.
I appreciate this conversation. I suddenly felt myself having this uncomfortable flash in the midst of this, of just so often what I've seen in my decades in higher education, that it's disproportionately female faculty who do the mentoring, and it's disproportionately faculty of color who do the mentoring. And so I think it's really important to talk about the institutional, the structural, the reward system, the people in leadership being out in front, because I'd hate, you know, I'm feeling myself like, yes, I need to do even more, and I do need to do even more, but I want to make sure that that is shared, and also, you know, and built into the institutional structures. And I'm also thinking, you know, for me, you know, my table of the faculty, the counterpart to that table, is to think about how can I, as an individual faculty member, build that mentoring into my classroom practices too, so that this really is part of what we do as the fabric of what we do, and it's not what I think has historically typically happened, been an add-on in addition to everything else we're supposed to do. So anyhow.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. That was courageous. So in terms of leadership, then the question is, are these conversations being posed in President Council, the Board of Trustees meetings, Is it a valuable way to spend your time in those high-power meetings when you have more, quote, important things to do? Is being an inclusive campus worthy of having that conversation? Or are we just comfortable with it in our beautiful, profound, noble statements? Can you tie it to other important conversations? Or can you say that unless we have this conversation, that this conversation might be the foundation for those other topics? And if you're really an inclusive campus, how would your meetings be different? How would you engage with your colleagues differently if you're really a mentoring institution at your meetings? Whatever your position is, you could start there.
Thanks. Ty Coleman again at St. Kate's. I agree with everything that has been said, but I just wanted to add, it's been in my experience as faculty, but also as a first-generation person, oftentimes people see mentorship as magic. So I think there has to be a way, and I agree that we're well-intentioned and we're well-meaning, but we have to be transparent. We have to acknowledge oftentimes mentorship works in a private way that works to further the power of certain groups of people. So maybe there also has to be a way where we can take the shame and the blame away from that, be in that space of not either or, but and both, and to acknowledge how it happens in ways that oftentimes is secretive. So I would add to this notion of transparency around changing the guidelines for tenure, transparency, accountability. We have to be able to measure mentorship and find a way to do that that doesn't make people bad, but to kind of lift the cloak or the veil, so to speak. Does that make sense?
One more, yes.
I have a social work background before I came to higher ed admin. And in working with many first-generation students, especially in Texas, and having lived in Mexico too, and thinking with colleagues, all this to say, I think it's easy to think and talk about this and get sometimes hung up on strategic plans. And I think a key to mentoring is to do and then reflect. So we're really good at thinking. That's probably why we're in this job, right? This industry. But I think if we can do more doing and reflection and not be so scared again about success or failure, we'll make a lot more progress than making really great strategic plans that look good on paper and don't transform lives.
Excellent. Thank you. I could talk about this all day, but the president gave me a nod like, no, you can't. No, so I got you. I got you, Madam President. I'm going to wrap it up here. So let me share with you what we're doing at Doherty Family College at St. Thomas University. This is our first full year at Doherty Family College. And so I will share with you components of how we're trying to be a mentoring institution, and I'll still share with you some challenges that deals with transparency, deals with reward systems. Still work in progress. So the mission of Doherty Family College is to offer scholars who need more academic preparation, come from under-resourced communities, an opportunity to earn their Associate of Arts degree in a learning environment that will provide them intensive academic mentoring, economic, social, and academic support to thrive in college. The goal of Doherty Family College is really to prepare scholars with the educational background they need in those first 2 years so they can continue either at the 4-year program at St. Thomas, but our curriculum is also structured to adhere to the Minnesota State curriculum guidelines so they can also pursue a 4-year institution in the state of Minnesota. That's the mission, the goal. It is now the 8th college of the University of St. Thomas. So we're part of the larger university. But we're different. There are 6 major components of the Doherty Family College that reflect some of the things you talked about in terms of what does a mentoring institution look like. First component, the curriculum. It always starts with the curriculum. DFC curriculum are the same core courses that we offer in our 4-year program. Those same core liberal arts courses. So DFC courses have to adhere to the same course objectives, course competencies as our 4-year program, but we emphasize that pedagogy is different. Because DFC pedagogy, we have to be mindful and intentional that it is culturally relevant. So when Dr. Lee says, can the scholars see themselves in the curriculum? That's part of the requirement for a faculty at DFC. That they are intentional when they're creating their syllabus to make sure their readings and their assignments reflect the lived experiences of the diverse scholars they teach. Maintain the rigor. That's important, especially if you have an asset-based approach. The rigor of our scholars remain. We are just scaffolding the support that they need to reach that standard. The second component is we have a cohort-based model. Our scholars are assigned their cohorts after their summer enrichment program. They take all their classes together. We know in terms of the literature that sense of belonging is really important in terms of retention, graduation rates. Well, that's one intentional way you can build that support. So they have a strong sense of belonging, a strong sense of community among faculty and scholars, and also to the larger identity of St. Thomas. Because that's when you know you really have an inclusive campus, when you measure your scholars or your faculty or your staff, their identity attachment to that institution. The third component is is a first-year experience seminar. Let's see, President. I like that class because I teach that class. So for our first-year scholars, I teach them in the fall and the spring. And in essence, I am teaching them the skills. Hopefully they're preparing and learning the tools and the knowledge that they need to master the formal curriculum and the hidden curriculum of going to college. So of course, I talk about topics related to the formal curriculum in terms of time management, study skills, note-taking. But we also talk about information and technology literacy, financial literacy. And then we talk about hidden curriculum topics, such as how to build social capital with your faculty and staff, mentors. And the host of unwritten college norms, values, and expectations covering that course. The fourth component is mentoring. Faculty are assigned to a cohort. They are the faculty mentor for those 25 scholars. They have to meet with those scholars in terms of a one-on-one mentoring session, 30 minutes every other week. That's a lot. That time is spent not selecting classes because we have a very targeted list of courses you need to complete for the degree, but that time is spent on talking about real personal, economic, family, work issues that are impacting their success in college. So they never have to feel they're isolated. Our scholars are going to have challenges. They come in to DFC with challenges. We just want them to know that they never have to go through any challenge alone. Fifth, professional development and paid internships. That's component. So is that connection, once again, between the liberal arts and real work experience. Our scholars go through a professional development course in their first semester, the first year, where they learn career development skills, interviewing, networking, how to write resumes. So they're ready in their second semester of their first year to be placed in internships, either at a corporation or a nonprofit. Because we believe in the integration of their liberal arts academics as well as work experience, one day a week in part of their academic calendar is set aside for professional development and internships. You can do that if you don't believe it's a false dichotomy. And then the last component is our faculty. Important. Our faculty not only have to have a mastery of knowledge in terms of their discipline, but they also have to demonstrate effective pedagogy that reflects, once again, the cultural backgrounds of the scholars that they teach. So they have to integrate culturally responsive pedagogy within and outside of their classroom because they're the mentors as well. God bless you. Hiring faculty is critical for our success. Now, those are the major components. And because we want our scholars to graduate not only with a strong liberal arts background, but also meaningful career development and work experience, we constantly have to assess how well we're doing on those components. In terms of evaluation, in terms of transparency, now our faculty can commit that amount of time to mentoring and developing and designing an inclusive curriculum because that is where their reward system is based. They're rewarded for being effective teachers and mentors. But there is a downside to that. Our faculty do not have the security of tenure. And we can have a debate whether that is security for most people right now anyway, but larger discussion. But that is still problematic. Although assignments have to be sort of reflect the lived experiences of our scholars, consistency. Some faculty are doing it better than others. There's mandatory mentoring sessions, accountability, transparency. How do you measure and assess those mentoring sessions? We still have to work that out too. And what's really big about some of the issues we're still struggling with is how do we make sure that a scholar, no matter who they're assigned to in their particular cohort, as their faculty mentor, is getting the same high quality of mentoring as another scholar. Because what happens a lot, as Ty said, is that many of us will mentor individuals. If you only think of mentoring in terms of one-on-one relationships, you think of it as a grooming. Like, I will mentor this person because I have some type of attachment to them. They remind me of me when I was younger, and I'm going to help them along the way. Now, if you're selected, that's beautiful. If you're the chosen. But if you're not the chosen one, who looks after you? And that's why we need a mentoring institution. Because then everybody becomes somebody's favorite. No one is left behind. And so the connection, I'll end with this, the connection between a mentoring institution and the liberal arts, education, is that they're kind of beautifully aligned. If you have an effective mentoring institution, you can reach the goals of your liberal arts education. After all, the goals of a liberal arts education isn't it to produce scholars who are critical thinkers, complex problem solvers, and morally responsible global citizens? You can do that in a nurturing and mentoring environment. And if we can transform our colleges and universities into mentoring institutions, we'll create an inclusive campus that reflects and embraces an inclusive curriculum. And most importantly, we'll produce more engaged and compassionate global change makers. That's one model. Now you're going to have an opportunity to think outside of the box, to think about what would an inclusive campus or curriculum look like at your respective campus and university and your teams. And that's where my dear friend Amy will walk us through that process. So thank you for your time.